Welcome. I'm Julie Fannin. I am an owner of Naturalist Journeys, and we're here today with Steve Grace, who's presenting to you about Guyana. And some of you may or may not know, Steve Grace is our 2024-2025 Guide of the Year. We're very excited for him, and he absolutely earned it this past year. So welcome, Steve. We're really excited to hear from you. For those of you who haven't traveled with us before, we are Naturalist Journeys. We're a small ecotourism company that runs small group tours all around the world. We love birding. We do a lot of birding, but we also love all wildlife encounters, and we love learning, and we love eating, and we love meeting new people and having good fun on all of our trips. And we really love having lots of repeat travelers on our tours. So some notes about tonight, just a few little housekeeping things. If you have questions for Steve or about Naturalist Journeys in general, there is on your right-hand side of your screen a message chat box. Just put them in there. I'll compile them, and at the end of Steve's presentation, we'll go through them one by one. Also, please mute yourself. And then that's about it. To keep things on time, I'll hand it over to Steve.
Hello, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time and your attention. When I hosted the Guyana tour back in October, it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. I cannot wait to go back. So I'll tell you why exploring this unspoiled wilderness was such a great experience and why you might want to join me. Before I left for the tour, I mentioned to friends that I was going to Guyana. Some people said, "Oh, Ghana in West Africa. I hear great things about it." One person mentioned the shoebill stork. They were thinking of Uganda. Guyana is not on the radar of most people. Most people have no idea where Guyana is or what it is or why they should go there. So, where is Guyana? In South America, more specifically northern South America. You can see from the map on the left, the country of Guyana is just north of the equator, and the northern edge of Guyana is on the Atlantic Ocean. On the right-hand map, you can see the neighboring countries, Venezuela to the west, Suriname and French Guyana to the east, and Brazil to the south. You can also see Guyana's capital city of Georgetown on the Atlantic coast. So why go to Guyana? Why go to this remote place that so few people know about? Well, three reasons: birds, wilderness, and people. Beautiful birds, spectacular birds, vast amounts of unspoiled wilderness, and extraordinary people, especially the indigenous people, the Makushi, who we work closely with. I'll expand on these three reasons throughout my talk. Here are a few facts to help orient you. Guyana is roughly the size of Idaho. More than 800 bird species have been documented in Guyana, and there may be many more. Much of the country is underexplored and underbirded. The human population is about 800,000, which is roughly the same as San Francisco. And the vast majority of that population, 90% or so, is on the coast around the Georgetown area. So most of the country of Guyana is very sparsely populated, and it's heavily forested. About 80% of the country is covered in forest. Now, of that forest, almost all of it is intact, pristine, primary forest, old growth rainforest, undisturbed by humans. This can be quantified through something called the Forest Landscape Integrity Index. This indicates the percentage of a country's native forest that is still intact. Guyana is near the very top of all nations on Earth, scoring a 9.58 out of a perfect 10. So when we say Guyana is mostly unspoiled wilderness, it's true. But before we enter that wilderness, we start the tour in Georgetown, a chaotic metropolis. But there's some good reasons to explore the Georgetown area, including this black-collared hawk. This spectacular raptor we saw several times throughout the tour around the country, but our best sighting was, I think, in Georgetown, where I got this photo. Here's a yellow oriole, a beautiful bird right in the heart of the city. And in the right-hand photo is Cara Lodge, where we stay in Georgetown. This historic lodge was built in the 1840s at the height of the colonial era. Guyana was settled by the Dutch in the early 1600s. All of what is now Georgetown is below sea level, but the Dutch developed a massive engineering project of seawalls, dikes, and canals to reclaim the land from the sea and create a lucrative sugarcane industry along the coast. For labor, they brought slaves from West Africa. So many people in Georgetown today trace their ancestry to West Africa. In the early 1800s, Guyana became a British colony, so English is the official language of Guyana. When Great Britain outlawed slavery, they brought indentured laborers, mainly from India, but also from places like Portugal and China. So this created a rich ethnic mix that exists today. And there are also indigenous people in Guyana. About 10% of the country's population is Amerindian, like the Makushi people we work with. And these indigenous people, or Amerindians, were the original inhabitants of the land, and now they're the main stewards of the vast wilderness where they live. Our first morning of the tour, we headed just a short distance outside of Georgetown for a boat trip on the Mahaica River. In the center photo, you can see the placid waters of the Mahaica overhung with jungle greenery. On the right side is one of many fantastic birds we saw that morning, a green-tailed jacamar shining like a jewel in the morning sunlight. On the left side is the star of the Mahaica River show, the Hoatzin, with its spiky punk rock hairdo. Here's another view of a Hoatzin. You can see that red staring eye that complements the spiky crest. This is a visually spectacular bird, but the Hoatzin also has a great story. It's the national bird of Guyana. The Hoatzin is known to locals as the kanji pheasant. It is pheasant-sized, but it is definitely not pheasant-like. The Hoatzin is part of an ancient lineage of birds stretching back some 64 million years to when non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. All close relatives of the Hoatzin around the world have died off and been relegated to the fossil record. The Hoatzin is the sole survivor of that ancient lineage, a sort of living fossil. The species has extraordinary adaptations. The chicks have claws on their wings. This makes them look like an Archaeopteryx, like some kind of primordial creature. When danger approaches a Hoatzin nest, the chicks instinctively drop from the nest into the water below. They swim to safety, and then they use their wing claws, these hooks on their wings, to climb the bushes back to their nests. Another adaptation of the Hoatzin involves the bird's strange diet. It eats leaves almost exclusively, very unusual for a bird. In the photo, you can see the arrow-shaped leaves of the mocha mocha plant. That's the Hoatzin's favorite food. It ferments those leaves with bacteria in a specialized digestive system, similar to a ruminant like a cow. Apparently, this rumination process is smelly. It has earned the Hoatzin the nickname stink bird. We didn't get a whiff of this when we saw them close from our boat, and we sure enjoyed watching and listening to these boisterous birds bashing around in the bushes. We had a great finale to this fantastic morning of birding. We went to the home of our boatman, Narish, whose family traces their ancestry back to India. Narish's wife prepared a delicious brunch feast of Indian delicacies like roti and curry. After this meal, while relaxing on Narish's porch, ruminating about this ruminant bird, the Hoatzin, one of the most extraordinary birds I'd ever encountered, followed by one of the most memorable meals of my life, I remember thinking, if I had to go home now, this trip would have been worth it. But we were just getting started. Next, we did a short drive to the Atlantic coast and saw lots of good birds, like this little blue heron on the right. In the center is a mangrove rail. This species is hard to see. Usually you're lucky to get just a glimpse of it skulking in the mangroves. This one came out into the open for several minutes, and our Makushi guides were thrilled. In all their years of living near this species, rarely had they seen one so well. On the left side is a scarlet ibis, a standout species on the coast. Like a flamingo, this stunning bird gets its color from the crustaceans it eats. Here's a rufous crab hawk. This handsome raptor is range restricted to the northeast coast of South America. We look for it around Georgetown because we have no chance to see it once we go inland. Fortunately, around Georgetown, it's fairly common and very confiding, so we have a good chance to see it and see it well. We also have a good chance to see the blood-colored woodpecker, a species with an extremely limited range, just a small sliver of habitat on the coast of Guyana and on the coast of neighboring Suriname. So we look for the blood-colored woodpecker in Georgetown Botanical Gardens. Now, botanical gardens is a bit of a misnomer. These aren't manicured, curated gardens like they once were. This is basically land that's gone wild in the heart of Georgetown, which is probably for the best. It is fantastic bird and wildlife habitat. On the right is a white-bellied piculate. Piculates are woodpeckers about the size of a sparrow. We found this charismatic species at the botanical gardens just after we found the blood-colored woodpecker. In the center photo is a festive Amazon, one of many parrot species we saw at the botanical gardens, including this blue and yellow macaw in the left photo. Two of these big, bold, beautiful macaws were engaged in some upside-down shenanigans in a palm tree right above us in perfect light. It was a great show. One of my favorite encounters at Georgetown Botanical Gardens involved a yellow-headed caracara, the species in this photo. I love caracaras. They're in the falcon family, but they look like hawks. They behave like scavenging vultures. And recent research indicates they have intelligence comparable to corvids or parrots. At the Botanical Gardens, two yellow-headed caracaras were engaged in a captivating aerial display, flying past each other, colliding in the air, touching their talons together. As they were cartwheeling through the sky, in front of them, capuchin monkeys were leaping from tree to tree. We were surrounded by a jungle soundtrack, limpkins screeching, orange-winged parrots making their raucous calls. This was extraordinary immersion in neotropical biodiversity right in the heart of Georgetown. But hey, let's get out of the metropolis. Let's head into the unspoiled wilderness of Guyana. That's what we're really here for, right? To get out of Georgetown and into that wilderness, we fly in a small plane. Here's our group with a little Cessna. The pilot flies low, providing an extraordinary sightseeing experience. Just after we took off, we looked below us and we could see scarlet ibis flying like brilliant brushstrokes against the brown mudflats as we made our way along the Atlantic coast. We got to see the Essequibo River, which is one of the world's great rivers. It's said that in its mouth, where the Essequibo meets the Atlantic, there are 365 islands, one for every day of the year. We didn't have time to count all of them because we turned and flew inland over the Guyana Shield. What is the Guyana Shield, you're probably wondering? Well, it's a Precambrian geological formation. It is 1.7 billion years old, one of the oldest geological formations on the planet. The shield covers most of the country of Guyana, most of Suriname and French Guyana, and parts of northern Brazil and eastern Venezuela, and a little bit of eastern Colombia. And this ancient geological formation supports an ancient ecosystem. The Eocrama rainforest has been growing for many millions of years atop the shield. It's one of the oldest ecosystems on Earth, and as such, the Eocrama rainforest has had a lot of time to develop extraordinary biodiversity. One of the shield's distinctive features is its tepuis. These are flat-top, steep-sided plateaus. You can think of them as tabletop mountains covered in jungle. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle thought a lot about them. When he read about expeditions discovering species that had evolved in isolation atop these plateaus, he let his imagination run wild and wrote The Lost World, a fantasy story about finding dinosaurs on the tepuis. You probably won't find a stegosaurus, but you might find a golden rocket frog, an endemic amphibian. The isolation of the tepuis is a driver of endemism. Take plants, for example. Of the 20,000 plant species that have been recorded on the Guyana Shield, 40% are endemic. They live nowhere else on Earth but on the Guyana Shield. Which brings, which brings us to an important question all you birders want to know. How many endemic species does Guyana have? Well, 0. There are no country endemics. That is to say, no species with their ranges confined to the borders of the country of Guyana. But there are many Guyana Shield endemics, at least 70 bird species with ranges restricted to all or part of the Guyana Shield. And the country of Guyana is a good place to see many of these, including that blood-colored woodpecker that I mentioned earlier, and many, many other fantastic species like the Guyanan cock of the rock, a spectacular cotinga that is a famous Guyana Shield endemic that we try to see on this tour. The tepuis, these steep-sided plateaus or tabletop mountains, produce a stunning geographic feature. Imagine water flowing along a table. What happens to that water when it gets to the edge? Kaieteur Falls happens. The pilot of our small plane flew close, providing views from above before landing near the falls. Kaieteur is 4 to 5 times as tall as Niagara Falls, twice the height of Victoria Falls. Now, it's not as tall as Angel Falls in nearby Venezuela, but Kaieteur is wide, especially in rainy season. It has tremendous volume. It is considered the world's largest single drop waterfall, not the tallest, but the largest single drop waterfall. Regardless of whatever superlatives we assign to it, it is spectacular. What I remember most standing at a viewpoint near the falls are thunder and rainbows, a constant low rumble like thunder from the cascading water and endless rainbows in the perpetual mist. There's fascinating natural history to explore around the falls. A plant called the giant tank bromeliad lives here. Now, bromeliads are pineapple relatives with leaves arranged in a rosette or circular formation that collects water in the center of the plant. In these pools, inside the bromeliads, and nowhere else on Earth lives the golden rocket frog. This frog is tiny, the size of a thumbnail, the width of a penny, but it's as brightly colored as its namesake mineral. There's good birding around the falls. It was thrilling to watch white-collared swifts fly behind the waterfall where they nest. They're trying to evade their nemesis, the orange-breasted falcon, a rare and highly sought-after raptor. This is a good place to see it. There's also a Guyanan cock of the rock lek, an area where the bright orange males gather to try to impress the females. No one was home at the lek when we were there. We had no luck at this lek. I'll talk more about the Guyanan cock of the rock later. After a couple hours at Kaieteur, we got back on that little Cessna and flew another 45 minutes over the rainforest to Surama. Here's a view from the plane of the Iwokrama rainforest, a green sea lapping against the horizon in every direction. You can see the plane shadow in the lower center of the photo. When you're flying low over the rainforest, it's exhilarating to think, soon we're going to be down there immersed in that green sea, exploring that unspoiled wilderness. We landed at a little strip in Surama, a village in the homeland of the Makushi. Indigenous people have lived here for millennia. They know the land best, and they are its stewards. They've created one of the world's great ecotourism projects at Surama. We stay in banabs, traditional circular huts with thatched roofs and adorned with art from local artists. There's a beautiful open-air dining area featuring delicious food, fresh papaya, pineapple, plantain, locally caught fish, locally grown chicken, homemade hot sauce if you want it. If you are a farm-to-table fresh food enthusiast, you are in bliss. This is Angie, who is not only a great cook, but also a great ambassador for Makushi culture. Here she is explaining a mural that depicts the ritualistic preparation of cassava, which for many generations has been at the heart of Makushi culture. Angie does beautiful things with cassava and other local foods, creating scrumptious meals. Staying in Surama is a wonderful cultural immersion experience. Here's the village school. We stopped by to donate some school supplies and meet the kids, who were a lot of fun. They looked very serious all of a sudden when I went to take their photo. Ecotourism not only supports the village, including the school, but it offers careers for young people. In the past, they had to leave their homeland and go elsewhere to find work. And this was a big problem. Now, young Makushi people have a career path available as a guide or working in some other role in ecotourism. Ecotourism is the main driver of the economy here, and ecotourism is the main reason so much of the wilderness remains unspoiled. This is ecotourism at its finest. It's a win-win scenario. Your travel dollars support a community and fund their important conservation efforts, and you get to have some extraordinary experiences, including maybe seeing a harpy eagle or two. Our group was very fortunate to watch two harpy eagles at a nest. To get to that nest, we had to go on a grand adventure, a boat trip on the Boro River. This river trip had superb birding, endless kingfishers gliding and diving, red-throated caracaras that looked positively prehistoric, noisy cacique colonies, toucans flying between trees, painted parakeets lined up on a limb overhanging the river, a king vulture soaring overhead, the white panels of its wings catching the morning light. The Boro River was full of birds and bats and butterflies. It was also full of obstacles because of the low water during the dry season. Sometimes we had to get out of the boat and balance on logs while the guides maneuvered the boat over obstacles. After a couple hours of fantastic birding and a great river adventure through the rainforest, we arrived at the viewing site. And there, in the upper canopy, the arms of an ancient silk cotton tree held an enormous nest. When we arrived, only the chick was in the nest. From a respectful distance that wouldn't disturb the bird's behavior, we watched the chick for almost 2 hours. Eventually, the mother flew in, suddenly, silently, a paragon of raptorial ferocity. The harpy eagle is the apex predator of the forest canopy, a hunter with legs almost as thick as a human's wrist, talons as long as a grizzly bear's claws, a slayer of monkeys and sloths. The male harpy eagle is the hunter who provides meat. The female is larger and more powerful than the male. Her job is to guard the nest and protect the chick. This harpy eagle mother had probably been perched in a nearby tree surveying the forest canopy for danger when we arrived. When the mother finally flew into the nest, we watched her and the chick greet each other. Then the mother began feeding the chick. We realized there had been meat in the nest the whole time, but the chick was waiting to be fed by the mother. With her savage-looking beak, the mother carefully tore off strips of meat and gently placed those morsels in the chick's beak. Watching one of the most powerful predators on the planet show such care and love for her young was a remarkable sight, a captivating fusion of ferocity and tenderness. We spent a couple hours with these birds, watching them and absorbing this extraordinary experience. This was one of the great nature encounters of my life. I will never forget it. On the river trip back, we saw some terrific birds like sungrebe and sunbittern, and we were part of a butterfly parade. Lemon migrant butterflies in countless thousands were all moving in the same direction that our boat was traveling. A living yellow cloud seemed to be escorting us along the river, adding a surreal element to an already magical day. The harpy eagles were certainly a highlight of the tour, but we saw so many other good birds around Surama. I only have time to mention a few. Here's a great putu doing its best imitation of a stump in the last light of day, just before it wakes up and starts hunting insects in the dark. Here are a few more members of the avian cast of characters we encountered. On the left is a golden-headed manakin. We found a lek. Males on this horizontal branch were doing a backward slide maneuver, fancy dance steps to impress the ladies who had gathered at this lek. In the upper right is a black nunbird. This lovable member of the puffbird family was playing with a leaf, throwing it in the air and catching it while taking a vigorous dust bath next to the road. In the lower right corner is an ash-throated crake. This is a good example of a species that would be very difficult to find on your own. But if you have a Makushi guide who knows exactly where to go and when to go look for it, you have a good chance to see this species with its red eyes staring back at you. We stayed a couple nights at Ada Rainforest Lodge, which has a famous canopy walkway. In the photo, you can see a brave soul venturing into the canopy far above the forest floor. If you have not had this experience of going on a canopy walkway, it's extraordinary. You enter a completely different world, and you are granted an eagle's eye view of the rainforest. While we were standing on a viewing platform, an ornate hawk eagle was doing a courtship flight display over the forest canopy. This is a glittering throated emerald, a common hummingbird on the tour. Our most memorable hummingbird encounter was a crimson topaz. At dusk, we staked out a bridge where a male crimson topaz makes an evening commute. When the sun is going down, he flies along the creek, stops for a drink, and perches for a few moments. We had to get into position and then wait for a glimpse of this crimson topaz, and eventually we saw his gorget gleaming in the day's last light. Now its cousin, the ruby topaz, you can find at feeders in Trinidad. You can sit on a veranda with a rum punch in hand and see a ruby topaz. To see this crimson topaz in Guyana, we had to work for it. And the harder you work for something, the sweeter the reward. Getting a glimpse of a crimson topaz after Makushi knowledge led us there, and after we invested time and effort in seeing it, was one of the most satisfying bird encounters of the tour. Here are a couple more memorable birds we encountered around Atta. Those are black curassows on the left. A couple of them hang out at Atta Rainforest Lodge in the morning and evening. To get this photo, I dropped down to the ground and crawled around. Watching these birds from this perspective reminded me of creatures I'd seen in dinosaur books as a kid. The bird on the right is a black-faced hawk. We ran into this striking raptor when we came around a bend in a rainforest trail. Our local guide at Atta said it was very unusual to see one so close and so well. I managed to get this photo after my camera broke. I captured this image digiscoping, putting my phone against the eyepiece of my scope. Just before my camera stopped working, I got this shot of a dragonfly. When I went to ID the species later, I learned that it is a blue morpho dragonfly. Those of you who've been to the neotropics may be familiar with the blue morpho butterfly, an iconic butterfly of New World rainforests. This dragonfly species has similar iridescent blue wings, but unlike the blue morpho butterfly, and unlike any other insect that scientists have studied, this dragonfly has wings made of living tissue. Scientists are very intrigued by this unique adaptation. There's a lot of fascinating research on this species right now. So this was a fortuitous encounter, and I think it's a good illustration of how in our Naturalist Journeys tours, we like to pay attention to all facets of natural history. Birds are but one of many wondrous things in the world. And rainforest is but one of many habitats in the tropics. The rainforest in Guyana is magnificent, to be sure. It is brimming with biodiversity, but Guyana boasts tremendous habitat diversity. This photo shows a white sand forest that we birded. White sand forests have sandy, acidic, nutrient-poor soil, which produces stunted vegetation and scrubby trees. Some bird species have evolved to specialize in this habitat. We searched the white sand forest for specialists like bronzy jacamar, a stunning bird, and the black mannequin of the white sand forest, which is fun to say and fun to look for. Toward the end of the tour, we left the forest behind to explore the Rupununi Savannah, a radically different ecosystem. It's very surprising after being surrounded by lush, dense rainforest to enter what looks like the plains of East Africa, expansive grasslands with an arid climate. There are cactus on the savanna. The savanna is also dotted with wetlands, and along the rivers are gallery forests. With these new habitats come new species. Here's a buff-necked ibis. This is a good example of a species you won't see in the rainforest, but you have a good chance to see a buff-necked ibis in the wide-open habitat of the Rupununi Savannah. One of the highlights of the tour was a boat trip on the Rupununi River, a birding bonanza. It was one of those times when you almost have whiplash from trying to see so many birds in all directions at once. Too many birds. This is a good problem to have. I'll take it. My favorite part of that river trip was when we passed through a heronry that was busy with boat-billed herons. If you haven't encountered this species, you're in for a treat. This bird is right out of central casting for a jungle film. The boat-billed heron has an absurdly large beak that it clacks relentlessly, and it has giant eyes for nocturnal hunting, and it sounds more like an ape than a bird. We saw agami herons with their long dagger bills and their stunning palette of colors, their rich chestnut and shimmering blue-green and their silvery spray. We saw green ibis on an island, birds that were a darker shade of emerald than the bright green grasses. I wish I had time to tell you about all the great river encounters that day. From the pied plover, perhaps the world's most beautiful shorebird, to jabiroos that stand 5 feet tall, to the black caimans that are larger than the American alligator and carry their young in their mouths, reminding me of that ferocious harpy eagle mother gently feeding her chick. At one point on that river trip, we beached our boat, carefully avoiding the caimans, and went for a walk along the river to explore the gallery forest and the adjacent wetlands. In this photo are Victoria water lilies, among the world's most fascinating plants. They rely on beetles for pollination. When a beetle enters a flower, the flower closes, trapping the beetle overnight and rewarding it with food. The next evening, the flower reopens, releasing the pollen-covered beetle. The flower changes color from white to pink, signaling it no longer needs pollinators. And the lily pads of this plant grow to an extraordinary 10 feet wide, the largest lily pads in the world. They can support the weight of a human child. They can certainly support the weight of a wattled jacana. This is one of the species we saw walking on the lily pads. This is a really fun bird, one of my favorites. They have crazy vocalizations. It's fun to say their name, wattled jacana. And this species has an extraordinary story, reverse sexual dimorphism. One female mates with multiple males. Dad incubates the eggs and raises the chicks while mom is off mating with as many males as she can, producing as many eggs as possible. With the wattled jacana, nature's come up with a fascinating reproductive strategy. Some other intriguing birds we encountered in the Rupununi area. On the left are lesser kiskidees being rambunctious near a river. This is one of many lookalikes of the great kiskadee, creating a fun ID challenge. On the right is a spotted puffbird that we found while walking along the river. We stood right below and watched it closely. This is a classic sit and wait predator, perching and patiently waiting for insect prey to fly by. And puffbirds have a surprising nesting strategy. They dig burrows in the ground. Other birds you see around the Rupununi include this Savannah hawk, which is fairly common. And we looked for the sun parakeet, a bird as colorful as a sunrise or sunset. This is a critically endangered species, but there's a robust effort to bring the sun parakeet back from extinction's brink. And we had the good fortune to meet Allie, a man involved with that effort. In a forest along a river, we searched for 2 other critically endangered species, the hoary-throated spinetail and the Rio Branco antbird. These 2 species are confined to a tiny bit of habitat on the Guyana-Brazil border. We were so close to that border, in fact, one afternoon we drove across a river into Brazil to have lunch. And to find these 2 species, the Rio Branco antbird and the hoary-throated spinetail, we went on a cool adventure. We used 4x4s on rugged roads to drive across the savannah. And then we went for a hike in riparian habitat with Jeremy, a local researcher who brought his machete to clear our path. Jeremy not only found these rare birds for us, he also shared his knowledge. He is self-taught and has helped lead a grassroots effort with international funding to do a population and range study of these critically endangered birds. And he is working tirelessly to figure out what these species need to survive. Hearing him tell his story was inspiring. In that context he provided made this experience very impactful, much more than just checking a couple of rarities off a list. When we were hiking out after seeing these species, something stopped Jeremy in his tracks and made him yell, "Is that what I think it is?" So our group was wondering, what does he see? A giant anteater, a jaguar? What Jeremy was thrilled to see, what he'd only seen twice before and never this well, was a creature sleeping in a tree. A porcupine, specifically a Brazilian porcupine. This shy nocturnal species has a long prehensile tail, which you can't see in this photo, but you can't see its pig-like snout. None of us on our tour had heard of this species, so you never know what you'll encounter on these tours. Sometimes something you didn't even know existed will appear and surprise you, and surprise your local guide. And speaking of surprises, wow, were we surprised the next day, the final day of our tour. We went to where a mountain range meets the savannah, trading the parched grasslands for a lush forest landscape. Along a little stream with a series of waterfalls, we hiked up stone slabs. We had fantastic primate encounters, a cute squirrel monkey, acrobatic capuchins, a lazy howler monkey. We found a flowering tree that may have had more hummingbirds than we'd seen on all previous days of the tour. On this final day of the tour, we were still seeing many new bird species. Amazonian motmot was a real stunner, and an Amazonian grosbeak was new, and probably had the best song of the tour. We were looking at a purple-throated fruit crow, which is a Caatinga species that was new for us, when our local guide Stefano shouted, "Cock of the Rock!" Now, at this point in the tour, on our final day, we had accepted we were going to miss this iconic species, the most colorful of the Caatingas. We had staked out a lek at Kaieteur Falls, and twice we had hiked to a lek near Ada. Nothing, no luck at the leks. We had made our peace with missing this one. We'd seen so many other great birds, we figured you can't win them all. But when Stefano yelled, we looked up and saw a bright streak like an orange comet rocketing out of the canopy. Absolutely unmistakable. A male Guyanan cock of the rock. Just getting that unexpected glimpse of this species was extraordinary. But we wanted more, so we scrambled into the forest, and there he was, perched above us. A bird-colored construction cone orange glowing against the emerald leaves. A male Guyanan cock of the rock in all his enigmatic glory. Males have a crest like an orange slice that covers the bill, making it hard to tell which way the bird is facing. This species can stretch your brain trying to figure out what exactly you are looking at. It's as if a cubist artist deconstructed a bird and then reassembled it in a random jumble of planes and angles, then added tassels to its wings and painted this creation fluorescent orange. This was a fantastic finale to an extraordinary tour. We documented 339 bird species. I wish I had time to tell you about all of them, but I will share a few more. In the upper left is a snail kite. You can see its hooked bill that has evolved to be slightly off-center to pry snails out of their spiral shells. We watch these raptors flying with giant apple snails in their beaks and talons. What has happened with snail kites in Florida in recent decades is one of the great stories in evolutionary biology during the Anthropocene. I'll tell you all about it on one of my tours. On the right side is a long-winged harrier flying in front of a tropical kingbird. I love watching the northern harriers around my home hunting voles and fields, and the long-winged harrier is like a northern harrier on steroids. We had great fun watching this bird hover in place just a few feet off the ground as it was looking and listening for creatures scurrying in the grass below. In the center photo is a green-throated mango that we encountered near Georgetown. Our guides at first thought it was a black-throated mango, a much more common hummingbird species. When they realized it was a green-throated mango, they were floored because this is a hard species to find. We watched two of these birds plucking spider webs, the gossamer strands glinting in the sunlight as the hummers flew away with this nest construction material. Most hummingbirds bind their nests with strong and elastic spider silk, so when those jelly bean-sized eggs hatch and the baby hummingbirds grow, the nest can expand without breaking. In the lower left is a green-rumped parrotlet, a small and charming parrot species, and the focus of fascinating recent research. Parents give each chick a unique signature call, like a name, to identify them. The parrotlets keep this name or signature call, using it throughout their lives. I've just been reading about the intelligence and complex social behavior of these green-rumped parrotlets before the tour, making it thrilling to see these remarkable birds in the wild. Of the 339 bird species we recorded, each of them is beautiful and compelling, and each of them has a story to tell, not just a check mark on a list. Why Guyana? Well, hopefully I've made a good case for why you would want to go to Guyana. Now I'm going to give you some reasons not to go to Guyana. This tour is not for everyone. It's brutally hot and humid day and night. There's no air conditioning in lodges once we leave Georgetown. The lodges have generators that tend to shut down at night, so sometimes there are no fans at night. There are a lot of bugs and no screens in the windows at the lodges, just mosquito nets over the beds. For much of the tour, we are a long way from medical care. There isn't good infrastructure for people with mobility challenges. This is evident right off the bat at Cara Lodge. Even in that fancy hotel in the heart of Georgetown, there are no elevators. You might be on the third floor. I'm happy to carry your bags, but you have to climb those steep stairs. And that river trip I mentioned on the Burro River, you may have to get out of the boat and balance on logs while the guides maneuver the boat around obstacles. So you have to be in reasonably good shape physically and mentally for this tour. You have to be prepared for the rigors of traveling in a developing country far from the beaten path. But if you are undaunted by those challenges, the rewards of going to Guyana are great. So why go to Guyana? Well, back to that simple formulation: birds, wilderness, and people. There's a squirrel cuckoo in that photo, one of so many wondrous birds that we saw. And there's a shot of the Surama rainforest, a largely pristine ecosystem that boasts stunning biodiversity. And here is Bevan, a young Makushi man who's a very talented artist who paints images of his country's iconic wildlife. And he helps with driving and guiding on the tours. Your tour dollars help support people like Bevan and his Makushi indigenous community, people who are making a valiant effort to preserve in perpetuity one of the last great places on the planet. I cannot wait to go back and see the birds and the wildlife and delve back into the Surama rainforest and Rupununi Savannah, two of my favorite places in the world. And I cannot wait to go back and work with my Makushi friends. So if you feel like you're up for the challenges of this tour and ready to reap the immense rewards of exploring this unspoiled wilderness, I invite you to join me or other Naturalist Journeys guides who are hosting upcoming Guyana tours. And I'm happy to answer questions. And I couldn't resist adding a few more bird photos here. We've got a beautiful scarlet ibis flying over the mud flats around Georgetown in the center there. On the left is a roadside hawk with its mesmerizing amber eye, and the ever charming striped cuckoo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. That was really lovely. This is just a reminder for everyone to continue putting your questions in there and we'll pull them up. So for now, let's hop into questions. Steve, the first question is, what is the temperature range and are there troublesome insects? Is the terrain rough when you're walking? And in other words, what are the downsides to being in the untamed wilderness? Steve, you're muted. Everyone's well trained to mute.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay, there I am. I'm back. Thank you for your kind words about my presentation. I guess I was muted for that part. Thank you, Julie. Okay, so yeah, great questions. So some of those challenges to traveling in this untamed wilderness. Yeah, so it is hot, and it'll actually be a little cooler in February and March when we go than it was in October. But we're looking at probably mid to high 80s during the day and high 70s at night, and pretty humid. In terms of troublesome insects, there are definitely insects and mosquitoes, so we have to be vigilant about that, staying covered up and using our insect repellent and things like that. There are chiggers, so we like to be careful about keeping our pants tucked into our socks to avoid those. And some annoying little biting flies and midges and things like that. But it was all tolerable. We took appropriate precautions. No one had any illnesses related to those things, and I've definitely been other places where the bugs were a lot worse. So they are there, but it's tolerable, it's survivable. And in terms of terrain, that's a great question. We don't do a lot of walking on this tour, but it is hot, so it can be very draining energetically. And we really aren't ever on any sort of paved or well-established paths. There are a lot of trails through the rainforest. There are a lot of roads that we walk on that can be deeply rutted and kind of unstable because they're underwater during the rainy season. There is one optional hike that involves hiking up some stone slabs, but that's entirely optional. The other, and that one can be a little challenging, but the other option is to hang out at a beautiful waterfall area. Um, so yeah, I hope that helps.
Okay, and the next question is about eating gluten-free. I can help answer that actually, Steve. Um, we we would say generally we would try to accommodate a gluten-free diet. Guyana is not Costa Rica. It's not a guaranteed. We would say that one, you advocate for yourself at each meal. Two, Steve would advocate for you at each meal. And three, we would absolutely pass along your dietary restrictions, but would advise you to please advocate for yourself. If it were life-threatening, or celiac or something very serious, we would say if we can't guarantee it, you'd want to reconsider. But I think generally you could probably do pretty well in Guyana. And Steve, maybe you can speak to that about meals in general. I think that you can
Yeah,
opt out of.
I was surprised at the quality of the food. It was superb from beginning to end of the tour. I didn't have real high expectations for the food. I guess I didn't really know what to expect. But the flavors were fantastic. There's a fusion of Caribbean influences there with Indian influences and a lot of the what the Makushi indigenous people eat. Every single meal was delicious and nutritious. It was safe and hygienic. We didn't have any stomach issues or anything like that. And every lodge we stayed at was very good about accommodating. We did have some dietary preferences and restrictions with clients on my tour, and those were honored throughout the tour. That really was never an issue. So I was very pleased with that. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I thought that worked out really well. And the food was just delicious. I can't wait to go back and eat more of it.
Um, Gail asks, how long is the trip and how much travel time is there to get from one area like the Guyana Shield to other spots like the Rupununi Savannah?
Okay, yeah, great question. So it's a 12-day tour, I believe, and but it's good to come in a day early, and I definitely recommend an extra day at Care Lodge, and we can do some bonus birding, so that you might want to consider that. That might add an extra day on. And then your travel time there, of course. And then in country, that plane flight we do is pretty quick. When we go from Georgetown to Kaieteur Falls, that's about I think that was about an hour. And then from Kaieteur Falls to Surama in the Iokrama rainforest, that was about a 45-minute flight. And most of the driving, it's not big distances, but we stop a lot to bird because the birding's fantastic along the roads. And we go on some side trails. Sometimes we're just birding along some of the roads. So we kind of take our way, meandering from lodge to lodge. There was, I guess, toward the end, there were one or two big, or I guess really one big driving day where we did spend a lot of time getting around the Rupununi. That was kind of when we left the Iokrama rainforest and really went deep into the Rupununi Savannah to the Brazilian border. And that day did involve some time in the seat in the van. But yeah, I think it was a pretty good balance overall of being out and active and birding with driving time.
The next question is what are the chances for giant otters?
Oh, they're excellent. We saw giant otters. Yeah, I think the chances are very good. Never any guarantees, but I'd be pretty surprised if somebody went on this tour and didn't see a giant otter. And that is a possibility, but I think you're very likely to see them again. We saw them a couple times, and once we saw them really well. They were hunting and eating some very big fish. There were also some Makushi people who were hunting with bows and arrows. They were hunting fish along the shallows of the river, and the giant otters were out in the river hunting bigger fish. So it was quite a spectacle. So yeah, odds are good for giant otter.
Um, the next question is what is the temperature and weather like in November specifically? And I can add to that, does it vary throughout the year?
It does vary throughout the year, yeah, but we're only going in the dry season. Um,
But it's like, actually, it doesn't vary that much. I mean, considering the times that we're there, I mean, it's still the temperatures are always kind of in that same range where you're looking at like high 70s to potentially low 90s. Yeah, a little cooler in November. And like I said, when we go back in February and March, it's going to be, I'm looking forward to it being a little bit cooler than when we were there in October.
Leslie wants to know, are the vans open air or air conditioned?
Oh, great question. That's the one place you get air conditioning. Yeah, so the lodges are not air conditioned. Once we leave Cara Lodge in the metropolis of Georgetown, there's no air conditioning in the lodges. But the vans do have air conditioning, and it worked really well. It was very refreshing, I have to admit, many times in the sweltering heat, looking forward to sort of trudging back toward the van and getting getting into that van with that refrigerator grade air conditioning. So and the guides would crank it and give us a nice respite from the heat. So yeah.
And then to tack onto that question about November temperatures, the question is it better to visit in November versus January through March?
Um, yeah, I think so is it better November or January through March? Um, well, let's see. I think either one, honestly. I mean, all those months have been carefully selected based on the wet season and dry season cycle. So I don't really have a strong preference for either of those time frames. I think they're both equally good.
The temperatures are very similar, and like Steve said, we don't go much past March or April because it tends to get wet and sloppy and even more humid. So again, the late October through March, early April are prime times to be there. Um, Next question. What are your top three favorite things about Guyana?
Top three. Oh,
You name three
three. I have to limit
or
it to
only
three. I could give you 300, but your time is valuable and we can't be here all night. But well, kind of the way I presented it in the show there, the birds, I mean, certainly, definitely that seeing that harpy eagle was one of the greatest natural history experiences of my life. The birds are phenomenal. I absolutely loved being in that unspoiled wilderness. I've been a lot of places in the world, a lot of wild places. This is the wildest place I've ever been. Looking out of that plane at that endless ocean of greenery, that unbroken canopy that laps against the horizon in every direction, that to me was just absolutely stunning. I mean, I get shivers just now thinking about it, remembering it, and anticipating going back. That unspoiled wilderness. There aren't many places like that left on the planet. And those people, especially the Makushi people, I really, really enjoyed working with them and getting to know them. They have big hearts, they're super smart, and they're absolutely devoted to one of the world's great ecotourism projects. And we love to help them with that and bring people to appreciate their homeland. So yeah, there's lots to love about Guyana, but I'll leave it there so we're not here all night.
And then it looks like one final question. Nathan wants to know if you saw a pompadour cotinga.
We did, yeah. We saw them a couple times, and we saw one. I'm remembering one that we saw really well. I got it in the scope, and some other people. So we had some scope views, and some people got some really nice photos too. Yeah, those can be a little hard to see in the. We saw them a couple times in thick foliage, but we had one sighting that was really beautiful. I mean, it was out in the open, and it was confiding, and it just posed for us. That was really cool. That's a very cool Katinga. And one thing about all our Makushi guides, when I always ask the local guys what their favorite birds are. That's always one of my first questions when I'm getting to know them. And I think every single one I talked with, Katingas were always top of the list. There's a lot of really cool Katingas, and and the Pompadour definitely is at the top of the list of cool Katingas in Guyana. So we did see it well, and hopefully we'll see it well again in February.
Okay, I think we're good. If anybody's not feeling quite as adventurous as Guyana, but feeling pretty inspired by Steve. There are 2 spots left on his spring Washington Olympic Peninsula tour. And also some space on our Southwest Parks tour that goes into Utah. But we do have lots of space on Steve's tour is it February or March? I forget. We have a few.
Mine's in February. Yeah, the end of February.
Yep, and we also have space on our March trip. So thank you so much. If you have more questions, you can email us at travel@naturalistjourneys.com. And the presentation will be recorded and sent out and available to you all on our YouTube channel in the next few days. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Okay,
Steve.
thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your interest, and I hope to see you on a tour. Thank you so much.